Welcome to the Three Martini Lunch. Grab a stool next to Greg Columbus of Radio America and Jim Garrity of National Review. Three Martinis coming up.
Hey, really glad you're with us for the Wednesday edition of the Three Martini Lunch. We've got a lot to talk about again today. We've got one good. We've got one that's bad with definitely a splash of crazy, and the last one probably falls in those two categories as well. Jim, I don't know if you watched the Major League Baseball All-Star Game last night. I caught just a couple minutes of it. Apparently, the National League won. That's not the story. The story is that the game was back in Atlanta, so we're going to be talking about that since Atlanta got stripped rudely of the All-Star Game 4 years ago. We'll also be talking about the glacially slow progress in issuing building permits out in LA following the wildfires. And this Texas Senate race, John Cornyn is running for re-election. A year or two ago, some people might have thought it'd been a yawner. Going to be very exciting potentially on both sides in the primary. So what has you intrigued most today?
Intrigued might not be the right word today, Greg. I think on a strange day, we have a good, we have a bad, and a crazy. And I find all of them infuriating. So just be ready. There will be plenty of you-know-what and vinegar in all three segments. I'm itching to go here.
Well, it's certainly an interesting time for business, including Major League Baseball. But let's talk about your business. That's way more important. You got tariffs and trade policies that are pretty dynamic right now. Supply chains are getting squeezed, and cash flow is tighter than ever. If your business cannot adapt in real time, you're going to be in a world of hurt. So you've got to have total visibility from global shipments to tariff impacts to real-time cash flow. That's NetSuite by Oracle, your AI-powered business management suite that is now trusted by more than 42,000 businesses. And right now you can download the free ebook, Navigating Global Trade, 3 Insights for Leaders at netsuite.com/martini.
NetSuite by Oracle gives you the visibility and control that you need to make quick decisions. And with real-time forecasting, you're peering into the future with actionable data. And with AI embedded throughout, you can automate a lot of those everyday tasks, letting your teams stay strategic. NetSuite helps you know what's stuck, what it's costing you, and how to pivot fast. It's one system, full control. Tame the chaos with NetSuite.
NetSuite is the #1 cloud ERP platform, and if your revenues are at least in the 7 figures, download the free ebook Navigating Global Trade, 3 Insights for Leaders at netsuite.com/martini. That's netsuite.com/martini. All right, Jim. Well, I guess one of the big surprises is that the National League actually won the All-Star Game last night. But the bigger issue that some folks talked about, but not a lot of folks talked about, particularly in the sports world, is that the game was back in Atlanta. It was supposed to be in Atlanta in 2021, but Major League Baseball panicked when there was a big old protest from Stacey Abrams and Joe Biden over Georgia's new voting reform laws. Joe Biden called it Jim Crow 2.0 or Jim Eagle, and Stacey Abrams was calling about as voter suppression. And then you had the CEOs of Delta and Coke lighting their hair on fire. And so without really talking to anybody, including the governor, Brian Kemp, Rob Manfred, the MLB commissioner, said, we're taken out of Atlanta. We can't be associating with these people. And they quickly moved it to Colorado. Well, it was back in Atlanta this year, and apparently everybody's just pretending that nothing happened 4 years ago because Rob Manfred, the commissioner, never said a word about it. And in this media report, it says, why, since the game was removed from Atlanta in 2021 over Georgia's then new voting laws, is it back in 2025 with the laws still very much intact? They then quote Pat McAfee, who's fine, but I'm not sure I'd go to Pat McAfee for astute political observation. He just says he assumes there was a reason or some conversation was had by Major League Baseball in the state, and everybody agreed to move on and bring it back to Georgia. Dave Roberts is the manager of the Los Angeles Dodgers. Back in 2021, he said, I think in a world now where people want and need to be heard, and in this particular case, people of color, for Major League Baseball to listen and do something about it, to be proactive, it sets a tone. What did he say this week? I do feel that I'm excited to be here. It's a great city. Baseball fans are excited to be here and celebrate these great athletes. I'm not a politician. I do feel that everyone has their right to voice thoughts, but right now I choose to focus on the players and the game. Jim, I think the reason it's back, perhaps because the controversy has blown over, but the main reason is the voting laws work. There's record turnout, including among black voters. And so the whole thing back then was a big gaslighting effort by the left. But of course, we can't admit that.
Greg, I'm going to quote from the Washington Post sports section today. Listeners know that I'm a columnist over there. In the op-ed page, not on sports, but says, quote, though the fervor around them has dissipated relative to 2021, those laws remain in place as the All-Star Game finally returns to Atlanta on Tuesday night. And in the early months of the second Trump administration, Commissioner Manfred's posture towards issues that whiff of anything political has changed considerably, end quote. Well, the first thought is, why has the fervor around these laws dissipated relative to 2021? Greg, what could possibly have happened to make people not believe that they're Jim Crow or Jim Eagle or any other comparison? What's happened between then and now? I got an idea. Let's take a look at the 2022 midterms. Oh, you know what? Not only was turnout the highest ever, not only did surveys indicate that almost every Georgia voter said they had no problem voting. I'm going to look at, a release from May 2023. A recent survey by the U.S. Census Bureau confirms that Georgia voters shattered turnout and participation rates in the 2022 midterm elections, leading the Southeast region. Recently, the U.S. Census Bureau published voter registration and pointed out it was the highest turnout in 20 years for congressional elections. The survey confirms that Georgia's election infrastructure is strong, finding a balance between voter accessibility and election security that promotes high turnout. Brad Raffensperger, the Secretary of State, taking a victory lap over them. Okay, all right, maybe it's the midterm. It was just lucky that first time around that no one had any problems and it was a record turnout. Surely they couldn't do that again the following year. Guess what, everybody? They actually had record voter turnout in the 2024 election as well, reaching about 5.3 million voters. Set records in early voting. Remember when this was going to stop early voting and it was going to be, you're taking it down from 6 weeks to 4, More than 3 million people for in-person early voting, breaking the 3 million total turnout mark in the weeks leading up to the election. Early voting was a significant portion. Total turnout was 1% higher than at a comparable point in the 2020 election. Remember, that's with COVID going on. And a lot of people didn't want to show up at the voting polls that days. So here we have not one, but two elections in which turnout break. So if this is Jim Crow or Jim Eagle, as President Biden insists upon calling it, this is the worst Jim Crow ever. This is like a counterproductive Jim Crow. It's, we're going to suppress the vote. These are the worst voter oppressors we've ever seen. So I look, Manfred, do you think by any chance maybe he feels once bitten, twice shy about getting active in politics and feel like, why isn't the commissioner taking a harder line in opposition to the Trump administration? Well, maybe that's not the job of the commissioner of Major League Baseball. His job is to run around finding people who have recorded games or described the events of a game without his express written permission. But a bit more seriously, doesn't Major League Baseball feel kind of stupid right now? Don't you feel kind of suckered that, Stacey Abrams and Joe Biden and a whole bunch of Democrats acted like these voting laws were the worst thing ever. And then in 2 consecutive elections, voter turnout breaks records and nobody's got any complaints. Nobody's got any gripe. Don't you feel like a sucker? I'm glad the All-Star Game came back. I'm glad Manfred has decided it's not my job to be an activist for the left, but I'd kind of like somebody else. I would have preferred if he'd gone further and said, we really got played for fools in that one. And we got wrapped up in hysteria and we bought into hype from political operators who just wanted to demonize Brian Kemp and Republicans in the state legislature. Clearly, there's nothing wrong with these state laws. Clearly, voter turnout is doing just fine. And it would have been nice to apologize. It would have been nice to regret it, or at least to acknowledge I did this in response to arguments that turned out to be false. Because that's what happened there. So, hey, congratulations, Atlanta. I actually did get near the stadium for a speaking gig. I've not had a chance to watch a game there. Everybody raves about it, says that it's a beautiful stadium. So good for them, but kind of an ugly chapter and another demonstration of the political hysteria that was going on in our country during that 2020 to 2021 period.
Amazing. Yeah, they got compared to Jefferson Davis and Bull Connor and George Wallace by the President of the United States, mind you. I don't remember Manfred's specific comments at the time, but obviously he had a strongly worded statement to explain why he was moving it to Colorado, and now we're just going to pretend it never happened. So I guess it's moving in the right direction, but that's kind of what you get, largely in politics, but certainly from the left. What controversy? What did I say? Oh, no, don't remember that one. Sorry. Honestly, Jim, all Rob Manfred needed to do is pick up a phone, call Brian Kemp, apologize, but apparently he's just going to pretend that none of this happened. 4 years ago. But if you're running a business, you need to know that every time you miss a call, you're leaving money on the table. And when every customer conversation matters, you've got to have a phone system that keeps up and helps you stay connected. And that's why you need OpenPhone.
OpenPhone is the #1 business phone system that streamlines and scales your customer communications. It works through an app on your phone or computer, so there's no more need to carry around 2 phones or use a landline. With OpenPhone, your team can share one number and collaborate on customer calls and texts like a shared inbox. That way, any teammate can pick up right where the last person left off, keeping response times faster than ever.
See why more than 50,000 businesses trust OpenPhone to manage their businesses' calls and texts. OpenPhone is offering 3 Martini Lunch listeners 20% off your first 6 months at openphone.com/3ML. That's OPENPHONE.com/3ML. And if you have existing numbers with another service, OpenPhone will port them over at no extra charge. OpenPhone, no missed calls, no missed customers. All right, on to our bad martini now, and this does not come as a big surprise at all to us, but it's certainly disappointing, especially if you had owned a home in Pacific Palisades or one of those other areas ravaged by the California wildfires at the beginning of the year. At the beginning of our email exchange today, I mentioned to Jim, hey, I just saw this story where out of 18,000 properties, only 800 building permits had been permitted. He's like, you think that's bad? It's actually worse. He says the LA Times says that there's only been 106 building permits issued, with an estimated 12,000 damaged or destroyed buildings. And if that weren't bad enough, there's now legislation up in Sacramento suggesting a board of bureaucrats will start making decisions about how and what's going to happen with that land, especially for folks who don't stay. So, Jim, nothing but lefties in charge in California, and it's rearing its head again.
This comes from a Los Angeles Times article a few days ago. They're saying that 6 months after the fires, more than 800 homeowners in Palisades and Altadena have sought permits to rebuild. Now, we should point out that there is Los Angeles, the city, and then there's Los Angeles, the county. You may recall that some of the initial anti-ICE kerfuffle, the violence, the burning of the police car, well, that was outside the city limits. So, you know, it was outside Los Angeles City, and it was a whole, blocks and blocks away. So why were people saying there was Los Angeles rioting? Because the LA metropolitan area extends well beyond that. On average, it's taken 55 days for the city of Los Angeles to issue a permit. So far, the contractors take care of the roof of my house are beating that, but just barely. All right. I just want to point out that, people out in California, I've got a tiny taste of the problem that you've got. And the other thing is that the measuring stick that I prefer to use, and I tend to look at the most, is by Los Angeles County, which is a bigger, broader area, right? And this encompasses maybe not every last spot that was hurt by these wildfires that are spreading all over Southern California, but it's a good chunk of the problem in the greater Los Angeles area. And it's funny because I'd written this morning that it was 106, and then I checked up when I was going to tweet about it, and I think I got up to 108. So remember, there are 12,000 structures that were either destroyed or damaged in the course of this fire. You can extrapolate. A couple months ago, I was doing an update on this, and I extrapolated out. It was going to take centuries at this pace to issue permits for all of the structures that were damaged in the wildfires. Now, I mentioned at the beginning of this podcast, I'm really kind of infuriated about all this. There is an entire argument going on across the country, a local level, state level, national level. And you can characterize it how you like, but a good way of putting it is the blue state model versus the red state model, right? Bigger government, higher taxes, more regulations, more bureaucracy, versus loosening all that, letting the free market take its course, and seeing how things, seeing if that creates jobs, creates construction, things like that. LA, does not have Republicans. Even Rick Caruso has to say, "Oh no, I'm an independent," wink, wink, when he's running for mayor out there. There are no Republicans to blame. Republicans do not have control of the state legislature. They need to say, oh, it's oil companies. Oh, it's the entire global environment. They have to really look far to find a scapegoat who's not affiliated with the political left, because the political left runs everything out there. Well, Los Angeles is what happens. Are you paying attention, Chicago and Brandon Johnson? Are you paying attention, New Yorkers, as you contemplate Zoran Mamdani? This is a big unresponsive bureaucracy. There's 1,000,001 regulations. There's 1,000,001 hoops you got to go through. And the system is not built to handle a disaster like this, where suddenly you've got 12,000 structures that are damaged or destroyed, and you want to get them rebuilt as quickly as possible. This is what you get. And the evidence is right there. And I noticed, look, I'm not saying I expect the national media to drop everything and periodically check in on Los Angeles. Think about the coverage you get of this versus the coverage you get of any other story, and notice how little, it was big news back in January when the fires were burning. And then the national media dropped it. And it is the anti-hot potato. It is a cold potato. They have lost interest in this because there's no way to tell this story without people looking at it and saying, wow, Los Angeles has a really crappy city government. Oh, by the way, Los Angeles County has a really crappy county government. Oh, hey, California as a whole has a really crappy state government. And there's not a single Republican you can blame for any of that stuff.
Yeah, exactly. And don't forget that Karen Bass and Gavin Newsom are now resistance heroes because they're pushing back against the deployment of ICE. So we have to keep that narrative pure, Jim. And so to point out the fact that things are moving at a ridiculously slow pace, that would muddy up the narrative. And of course, I'm sure you remember back not long after the fires when Gavin Newsom did that little shimmy with his shoulders talking about reimagining and redeveloping the area. There's a lot of folks worried now that things aren't going to look anything like they did before, but we'll see what happens on that front. But yes, in terms of actually responding to people, getting their needs taken care of and moving things along, not surprised, but horrible all the way through. Well, Jim, it would be understandable if some California homeowners in that area felt like punching a hole in the wall, but there's two problems with that. Number one, they don't have any walls because they can't get a building permit. And secondly, they would need a doctor after that. But if they do, ZocDoc is definitely the right choice. Instead of following every new health trend on social media, turn to real healthcare experts who can help you meet your health goals. And with ZocDoc, you can quickly find and book trusted doctors tailored to your needs. ZocDoc is a free app and website where you can search and compare high-quality in-network doctors and click to instantly book an appointment.
With ZocDoc, you can book in-network appointments with more than 100,000 doctors across every specialty of medical care. From mental health to dental health, from primary care to urgent care, you name it. And you can filter for doctors who take your insurance or see if they're located nearby. You can see if they're a good fit for any particular medical need that you might have. And you can check to see that they're highly rated by verified patients. Once you find the right doctor, you get to see their actual appointment openings, choose a time slot that works for you, and click to instantly book a visit.
Jim has used ZocDoc. I have used ZocDoc. Could not recommend it more highly. So stop putting off those doctor's appointments and go to ZocDoc.com/3ML to find and instantly book a top-rated doctor today. That's ZocDoc.com/3ML. ZocDoc.com/3ML.
So the Federal Reserve offices in D.C. are getting an extreme Soviet makeover? The Watchdog on Wall Street podcast with Chris Markowski. Every day, Chris helps unpack the connection between politics and the economy and how it affects your wallet. The Federal Reserve offices are getting a $2.5 billion renovation. For perspective, Jerry Jones built Cowboy Stadium for $1.15 billion. Whether it's happening in D.C. or down on Wall Street, it's affecting you financially. Be informed. Check out the Watchdog on Wall Street podcast with Chris Markowski on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcast.
All right, Jim, on to our final martini now. And for that, we head to the Texas Senate race. Usually Texas Senate races don't get that much attention. When Ted Cruz is up, it'll get more. The media, of course, fell in love with Beto in 2018, and Beto didn't quite get there, even in a pretty big year for Democrats. And then last year, Cruz was up again, and the media was all in love with Colin Allred, and Cruz won by 9 points. 9 points, not exactly a nip and tuck race down there in Texas. But now John Cornyn is up, first elected in 2002, about to finish up his 4th term, seeking a 5th. He's up against Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton, and most of the early polls suggest Paxton has a pretty healthy lead against Cornyn. A lot of the Trump voters find John Cornyn to be too squishy, and they see Paxton as more aligned with Trump. And just to make things even weirder on the Republican side, of course, State Senator Angela Paxton is divorcing Ken Paxton because of what seems to be repeated infidelity. She says she has biblical grounds to do it, so that would seem to be the case. So that's all being openly aired as we head towards the primary early next year. But then on the Democratic side, you've got Colin Allred, who's in the race. But a new poll initially obtained by the Daily Caller from the National Republican Senatorial Committee, suggests that if Jasmine Crockett runs for Senate, she would start with a very big lead. Crockett led with 35%, compared to Allred at 20%, and Beto O'Rourke, they're still talking about him, and Texas Representative Joaquin Castro both at 13%, according to a survey, again, conducted by the NRSC. Now, it's worth pointing out that in Texas, if you don't get to 50%, there is a runoff, so you do have to get there eventually. A poll from the University of Texas at Tyler showed that Crockett was also the top choice for shared values among likely Democratic voters, garnering 30% support. However, in that same poll, Allred edged Crockett 34% to 27% on the issue of who has the best chance of actually winning. So, Jim, this is going to be quite the soap opera on both sides of the aisles, especially if Crockett actually gets in this thing.
So much to unpack here. But let me just kind of begin. Look, we don't know exactly how the Senate race in Texas in 2026 is going to play out, but there's an extraordinarily high chance that on election night, right after the polls close, the announcers will say the Republican nominee for Senate wins in Texas. Right now, it's probably going to be Cornyn. I've heard some people say, the MAGA crowd has turned against him. When you look at Ken Paxton, you could understand why ladies would be throwing themselves at him, right? I mean, he just, sure. We're just talking. That's Clooney, that's Schwarzenegger. That's just every alpha male trait rolled into one. So, cut the guy some slack. A man can only resist so much temptation, But whoever the Republican nominee is, it being Texas, is probably going to have a significant advantage. And the way I've come to look at it, if you think of like there being 4 really big populous states in America, California and New York are very, very Democratic. And, we're a long ways from the days of George Pataki, never mind Alphonse D'Amato and all that. It's very, very hard for a Republican to win statewide in New York or California. Maybe things in California are getting so bad, but it's really tough to see that. Texas and Florida have gone from, are now very, very Republican. Funny is, there was a time when Democrats had a pretty good foothold. This is way back in the Ann Richards years, and it's been a generation since they've been remotely competitive. Similar story in Florida, and I just want to point out that when you begin to look at a Senate election cycle, none of those 4 states should be in your swing state category. With that having been said, you can find mainstream media columnists who will write glowing profiles about the Democratic nominee in Texas or Florida with levels of credulity that makes you think they must be responding to those emails from African princes asking for bank account numbers. And now that Jen Rubin who used to write for the Washington Post, doesn't anymore, and Jim can be a lot more open about his thoughts here. I know she wrote about, I think she predicted Democrats to win both those states. I could be wrong. I think the Post asked us all of us for all of our predictions. By the way, Greg, who was who was closest to all of his predictions last cycle?
Would that be you?
How'd you guess? By the fact that I'm bringing it up. Yep. So there will be somebody, whoever wins the Democratic nomination in Texas, you will get, it may not be the level of Beto Mania in 2018, I think it was, but that was an all-time champion, glowing national coverage. And my suspicion is, having been to Texas a bunch of times, Texas is a great place to visit. It's pretty warm, particularly in winter. Food's great. Shinerbach when it's cold is fantastic. You're like, this is a great place to do it. So you love going down. The problem is it doesn't have competitive statewide races. But Beto would do skateboard tricks in the parking lot or all that kind of stuff, or do some guitar licks and all that stuff. Am I correct? I get the feeling this is the first cycle where people aren't mentioning Beto O'Rourke as a statewide candidate. Go figure, you lose 3 straight cycles, people lose their interest in you. Colin Allred, as you mentioned, is being mentioned as a candidate under the theory of, yes, I just lost by nearly 1 million votes, but maybe everyone in Texas will change their mind. That's I believe, the strategy. And by the way, I'm not saying you can't run for office again if you lost, but I always like to hear from a candidate, yeah, I learned a lot of hard lessons from that loss. Here's what I'm going to do different. And very often the argument is, no, the electorate was wrong, and now they clearly have to see how much they screwed up by voting for the other guy, and now they will come begging on their hands and knees, begging for the chance to vote for me again. Shockingly, it never shakes out that way. But that appears to be the Colin Allred strategy here. Jasmine Crockett, I could hear the groans from our listeners right now. Like credit where it's due. If somebody said, be the next AOC, Jasmine Crockett's come very close to doing that, which is not to say that she's going to be particularly competitive in a swing district. It's not, there's going to be light years away from being competitive in a tough state to win like Texas. But boy, she's going to be raising a ton of money. Right? She is going to be the darling. She's going to be adored by the MSNBC crowd and every grassroots progressive coast to coast. And so if you're the National Republican Senatorial Committee, like, you got Texas in the bag, but boy, Jasmine Crockett as the Senate nominee, maybe after 2 cycles, maybe because there's a runoff to get that. Oh my God, it was so much money. There's going to be so much Democratic money that could be spent in like North Carolina or some actually genuinely competitive state. But no. You want as much of that money spent in Texas as possible. You want these candidates buying television ads in the Austin market where everybody watching already agrees with them, other than Elon Musk when he's down there. And Beto O'Rourke broke all fundraising records back in 2018. Crockett might be able to go through it. And you go down that list, the other names, I'm hoping that there is a competitive Democratic Senate primary down in Texas. That would be fantastic news for Republicans. You mentioned Joaquin Castro. Boy, you want to talk about names you haven't heard in a while. Julian Castro. First of all, Julian Castro was the former mayor of San Antonio. He's the former Secretary of HUD, which, as we all know, is a stepping stone to the presidency.
Of course.
Julian Castro, not Joaquin, ran for president and was one of the few people back in the 2020 Democratic presidential primary who on stage was willing to argue Joe Biden's memory was starting to fail him. What did Democrats do because he did that?
They shunned him.
They punished him. For the new Superman movie is out, Julian Castro was cast into the Phantom Zone. You know that thing that they're floating through space and you disappear, you never hear from him again? That's what happened because he had the audacity to point out, he said, hey, that emperor looks kind of naked. I'm off with his head, make him disappear. And he was basically extraordinary renditioned off to somewhere. Nobody, okay, he was an MSNBC host, but that's as close to disappearing as you possibly can. So if you're Republicans, the idea of Jasmine Crockett running for Senate, that's in what probably going to be a challenging cycle, that's going to be really good news for you.
Well, if she's the nominee, it's going to be just the greatest gift ever to whoever wins the Republican nomination, although I do think she'll have trouble getting to 50% even in Democratic primary. But time will tell. I like your point about the glowing profiles. You don't see that, though, in the blue states. I didn't remember a lot of mainstream news sources just gushing over Lee Zeldin, who was such an obvious better candidate than Kathy Hochul in 2022. And honestly, I couldn't even tell you who ran for Senate in those states in recent cycles on the Republican side because they were so lopsided. We will find out between, the divorce, Jasmine Crockett's antics, if she gets in this thing. It's just a lot of different dynamics to pay attention to, and it'll probably be pretty weird, but it'll definitely not be dull. So, Jim, on that note, we'll let you go for today and see what the news cycle serves up for us tomorrow.
See you tomorrow, Greg.
Jim Garrity, National Review. I'm Greg Corombos of Radio America. Thanks so much for being with us today. Please be sure to subscribe to the 3 Martini Lunch podcast if you don't already, and tell your friends about us as well. Thanks also for your 5-star ratings and your kind reviews. Please keep those coming. They really do help us a lot. Also, you can get us on your home devices. All you have to say is play 3 Martini Lunch podcast. Follow us both on X. He's at Jim Garrity. I'm at Greg Corombos. Have a great Wednesday, and join us again Thursday for the next 3 Martini Lunch.